All right, hey everyone. I just want to walk through this free response that I assigned today so we could have a little conversation about it in our next face-to-face meeting through Zoom. So rather than me talk through how to do the problem, I'm going to send you the scoring guidelines, which I have on the left side of my screen, and this video, which is just going to sort of talk through some of the basics. So first off, I gave you this one for two reasons. The first one is like there's only so many problems we can do where there's like a recessionary gap and the economy wants to like increase aggregate demand. All right, that's fine, and you need to know how to do that, but this one's a little bit different. Just a reminder of like, hey, can you do production possibility curves? So what's going on? There's some level of production that this country, Rankin can do, and they're not producing at their maximum capacity because they're in a recession. So you can see over here on the scoring guidelines, very straightforward production possibility curve. Then in part B, expansionary monetary policy. So that means more money, increasing the money supply. Open market operations, they would need to buy bonds. Remember, when the central bank buys bonds from people, the central bank has the bonds and people have the money. So that's more money. There's a money market graph. Semi-good news maybe is that on the AP exam that's coming up, there will not be a question that asks you to graph things because that would just be like copying. But you might need to interpret a graph. So you might need to like just sketch a graph like on the side. So maybe at least like you would have this idea in your head to show that the rate decreases, which is B part 2. Assuming no change in the price level, what happens to the real interest rate as a result of the monetary policy? So the interest rate, nominal interest rate would go down. Nominal interest rate goes down because there's no change in price level. Then the real interest rate would also go down. Again, when the nominal interest rate goes down, the real interest rate goes down because there's no reason to worry about inflation. What happens to real GDP in the short run? So real GDP increases because there's more money going around. We don't have to worry about inflation again. So there also, because interest rate is going down, people are going to consume things where they need to take out a loan, like a car loan or a house loan or a business investment. So that's the end of part B. Okay, part C, I'm going to hustle through. I'm just going to actually show you what's going on. The reason why is because foreign exchange markets will not be, and current account will not be on the this year's AP exam. We were talking about it right before spring break, but it's not going to be on there. And you can sort of read this here, or you can read it when it comes through. The short story is that current account deficit will increase. Why? Because the interest rate's down. People are going to invest less in this country and more in some other currency. All right, here's the second reason that I wanted to do this set of free response problems. We need to step up our game with these T-charts. Assets and liabilities. We've almost only looked at demand deposits being liabilities and reserves being the assets, but reserves and loans being the assets, but banks could have more things as assets. They could own stocks. They could owe money for the building that they're in. They could have assets for the equity in the building that they're in. There's a lot of an owner's equity. This is the actual bank. So if someone owns the bank, that's how much they owe the owner. In this case, 0. But there's a lot more stuff going on, and you can look out for that as we get closer to the exam. This should be pretty straightforward. Require reserve ratios 10 divided by 100, or 10,000 divided by 100,000 is 10%. This person withdraws cash from the checking account. How much will the reserves change? So reserves will decrease by 5,000 because where does the money come from? Boom, right out of the bank's reserves or their vault. The initial effect of the withdrawal on M1 is nothing because it moves from demand deposits to cash. So no initial issue. But as a result, what's the new value of excess reserves on the balance sheet? Well, the excess reserves, boom, left. all that 5,000 is gone, but it's not zero because demand deposits are now 95,000. That means that the reserves that the bank needs is 9,500. That's what's required. So if they have 10,000 because they gave this 5,000 away and 9,500 is required, $500 is the difference in what's now excess reserves. Okay, the next day, John withdraws from the bank an amount that exceeds the bank's excess reserves. So now the bank is like, uh-oh, I need to meet the reserves. I don't have it. What do I do? Well, they call another bank that might have extra reserves or excess reserves, and they borrow from them. And that's that federal funds rate. Some people have asked about assuming no loans are called in. That's like theoretically a bank could say, hey, you owe $200,000 on your house, give us your house or the $200,000 now. But if some bank did that, no one would ever work with them. So it's really like not something that's used like to call in the collateral or to call in a loan. You could think of like a mafia person calling in a loan and being like, okay, you owe me this money, so you need to pay me right now as opposed to in installments. But that's not on the AP macro curriculum. All right, there you have it. Here's aggregate demand, aggregate supply showing up in number 3. Again, should be super straightforward, but on the AP you won't have to graph. You won't have to graph this. You won't have to graph this aggregate demand, aggregate supply graph. So here's the initial aggregate demand, aggregate supply, and then what happens is in part B, aggregate demand moves. So higher exports. Remember, real GDP is consumption plus investment plus government spending plus imports, exports. This is, even though it's sort of international trade, exports would be on the AP exam. So this says assume there's an increase in exports that increases aggregate demand, moves real GDP to the right, causes a higher price level, and that's the higher PL. Based on your answer, what's the impact of higher exports on real wages? So the idea here is that people are going to be paid the same, but there's inflation, so things cost more. That's a decrease in real wages because the amount of things that you can afford is going to be less. You're getting paid the same, but as we showed in this graph, the price level is increasing. Okay, part D, as a result of the increase in exports, export-oriented industries increase expenditures on new container ships and equipment. That's investment, I, of aggregate demand. And what's the impact on long-run aggregate supply? The idea here is if you invest and you have more container ships and equipment, then you're able to produce more, and that would shift the long-run aggregate supply to the right, or increase the potential GDP, because remember, this is potential GDP. So if you invest in a bunch of stuff, imagine if any company like, say, Apple invests in a bunch of new manufacturing warehouses, then they can make like a whole bunch more, and the potential GDP would be like, who knows, way out there. That's what creates economic growth, is when you increase your investments. All right, thanks. We'll chat about this Wednesday, Thursday.